Hello and welcome to DM&D here on the Tumble Tankard YouTube channel and, well, Discord channel, Discord server as well. My name is Jim, aka Argent Wind, and I'm your host here for today. And as we will be talking today about, well, the title is called Mix and Match, because there's a lot of times when you want to play a game, you don't want to play the same old game you've always played. And we talked about, in the past, we talked about other systems that are out there, but today we're looking at how we can get a systems that mash up genres. The idea of like mixing and matching from different settings or different types of adventures. And so we're going to talk about, first of all, some systems that already do that in their kind of their core creation of what they do. And then we're going to talk about how to add some mashed up elements into your existing games you're already running. So first, though, let's talk about some of those systems that are out there. We've had shows where we talked about different alternatives to D&D or alternatives to other systems and everything else. But there's a whole lot of systems that the whole premise of the system is a mashup of genres. I'll point out a few of them here. So we have Shadowrun, which mashes up cyberpunk with fantasy, bringing in elves, dwarves, and dragons into a corporate-driven dystopian future world with cybernetics and crazy, power-mad, power-hungry corporate overlords and everything else. And so Shadowrun is kind of that built-in mashup there. We have Deadlands is a fun little mashup here. This is sort of a wild, they call it the Weird West. It's sort of a wild western setting with some supernatural elements like zombies and other monsters, along with people that use magic. So again, the Weird West there of Deadlands. You have what else do we have here? We've got, let's see here, Cthulhu Tech. This is a very odd one here, but it mashes up a few different things here. But the whole genre of eldritch horrors of Cthulhu, along with technology in the future, where they have giant robots like Gundam or mecha type things to fight those big creatures. And it has an interesting concept of having different scales of people, normal people with guns and items and everything else, and then a hybrid in between, which is very similar to the anime known as the Guyver, where you have some of these guys in these weird alien powered suits that give them enhanced abilities. And so you have that sort of thing. So these three different power levels of games. Interesting setting. Questionable rules, but some fun mechanics in there, but a very interesting setting there at Cthulhu Tech. We also, of course, have Dresden Files, a modern day fantasy setting here, based on the Dresden Files novels by Jim Butcher. It uses the Fate system, and it's basically at its core sort of a detective, modern day sort of adventures like that, where you have a lot of supernatural elements thrown in. Like werewolves and vampires and things like fey creatures and everything else. And so this one has a lot of elements of more modern day setting with that overlay of magic and supernatural. Characters can be wizards or can be werewolves or can be just normal people trying to get by in a crazy, messed up world. Kind of a secret there. Um, and then sort of I would say probably you want to mash up everything together, and that's Feng Shui, where we have the action movie role playing game where basically you can take a cybernetic person, a kung fu cop, and a ghost all in the same party, trying to fight off some incursion from some weird faction from the future or from the past. All kinds of weirdness in this one here. But again, it mashes up a lot of genres in a very fun, fast-paced setting, or fast-paced rule set. Um, Beyond that, we have other mashups. If you're looking for a fantasy sci-fi mashup, back in the days of about D&D 3.5, 3.0, so when they were kind of pre-Pathfinder, there was a setting known as Dragonstar, which was literally D&D in space. And I mean deep space there. You had spaceships and ray and plasma guns and alongside dragons and other things else, where you basically had this mashup of science fiction technology along with magic. Wizards can throw spells at spaceships to try to blast them open, that kind of thing. Um, Fun setting, very imbalanced, but it had a lot of fun flavor to it. And in that same vein, we still now have Starfinder, which is Pathfinder's sci-fi magic setting. That's still in production these days here. Sci-fi Starfinder Second Edition just came out very recently, and so there is that aspect there. And of course, if you want sci-fi fantasy, you can never go wrong with good old Star Wars. There's been many editions of Star Wars and role-playing games, from the classic West End games version from the 80s, all the way to some modern editions that have come out, that really lend themselves well to playing in the Star Wars universe. But yeah, again, it is a sci-fi fantasy mashup. You've got people in spaceships and shooting ray guns, along with people using mystical powers, known as the Force, obviously, to do fantastic things with their minds. And so you have that sort of science fiction and fantasy element kind of thrown together. Um, there's a few systems that really incorporate sci-fi and horror. And I don't currently, I mean, Cthulhu Tech sort of does that well with kind of the eldritch horror, but it's very much like I'm, it's like Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla kind of thing like that. It's weird, but with eldritch horror thrown in. So weird mashup there. But you also have a system known as Eclipse Phase, which brings in the idea of body horror. Eclipse Phase is based very similarly, on the genres where you take a person's brain consciousness and put it on a chip and can slot it into different bodies, android bodies, anthropomorphic animal bodies, all kinds of interesting things like that there. But there's an element in the game there where things can go wrong. People can go insane or get possessed by strange super, like almost alien entities that can take over their bodies and make it all go bad. So Eclipse Phase has an interesting like body horror, like eldritch horror, cosmic horror kind of elements mashed together with a very high sci-fi, very advanced sci-fi setting. Um, and then if you really want sci-fi horror, you cannot go wrong. There's an Alien role-playing game set from the Alien movie franchise, from Mothership Games. They actually have a free kind of tutorial mission, with some light set of rules there you can find online. And it's very fun. It's a very fun setting, very much in the line of the movies of that hopeless. You're not going to beat these things unless you manage to get lucky. I did play in an Alien game where my character did not survive. I was one of the ones who definitely got killed, um, by the alien. We had another person get killed by an opposing crew of people. So kind of fighting over a derelict spaceship with some pirate type things, and aliens were on board already, and so kind of a crazy mashup of science fiction and horror elements. And so beyond games that are built this way, I mean, like Shadowrun and Deadlands that have those built into the game themselves, and their own set of rules and everything else, you have a lot of generic systems where you can take and mix and match those things yourself. Obviously, things like GURP, generic universal role playing system. It has rules for magic. It has rules for science fiction. It has rules for horror, and you can pick and choose from those things and mash them together into one set up for character creation, and bringing in enemies and plots that can be set in whatever setting you want, that mashes up whatever elements you want. The same goes for Hero. Hero system is a little more crunchy version of that. It lends itself more to superhero, in the area of champions, but there's also fantasy hero. There's also cyber hero. There's also other things like that. And if you want to take and combine them together, you can do that because the system is generic enough to allow you that mix and match there. Um, Cypher also does very similar things. It just sort of system agnostic. You've got, even on the cover here, you can see you've got superheroes, you've got fantasy characters, you've got science fiction people flying on rocket bikes, and you've got horror elements. And so the Cypher system also lends itself toward mixing and matching genres together. Fate, as we mentioned, Dresden Files is the Fate system, but Fate Core, there's all sorts of different versions of Fate that that incorporate different elements of different genres and everything else. And of course, uh, one of our denizens of the tumble tankard there, and has been a guest on our campaign, Avarice, the Shattered World. There, Dennis, OKSDM, has successfully run his Kickstarter for Sagas, setting a genre agnostic system that literally is meant to mix and match whatever genres and settings you want to put together. And so the idea of being able to do that, there's a lot of different tools you can use to create a campaign, to create a setting that incorporates all that together. So feel free to reach out there, and you can find resources online for helping with that. And so there are systems that allow you to do that and do whatever you want with whatever setting, whatever genre you want, and mash it all up into one crazy bundle of what could be a lot of fun. Now, I will point out here, honorable mention, and when you talk about meshing up genres here, someone's going to bring up Rift, Rifts. And I will just say Rift is a chaotic mess of a system. I've played it. Palladium Games is the creator for that. I don't think it's currently being published anymore, but you can find them in stores and used bookstores and everything else like that. And people talk about Rift. It is an absolute mess of a system. They mix and match everything together, but not well. And so you'll have like a giant mech thing trying to fight a dude with a bow and arrow. And of course, who's going to win? Well, obviously the giant mech is going to stomp on the guy with the bow and arrow. So real quick campaign there when you're playing the guy with the bow and arrow, or not very challenging if you're sitting in the mech. So it's really, you have to really do a lot of work to make that system work for you in a way that's either not going to be too one-sided either way. But it is out there, and I know people that religiously have played Rift and have enjoyed it. I had some fun with it, but again, it's really difficult to kind of balance that together without a lot of extra work. Now, literally with these systems here, the sky's the limit. You can do whatever you want, but it's going to be as with any world building, as with any campaign start, you're going to need to work with your players on what sort of ground rules you have. If it's not already baked into the system, what they can do. If you're trying to make your own, it's really a challenge to go in and set what power levels, and set what type of things you have. And so you kind of have to find ways of balancing what's available to you. And so don't be afraid to work with your players. Don't be afraid to kind of turn this over. And you're probably going to need experienced players. Brand new players are not going to feel comfortable in a system where anything goes, or where it's a little bit too chaotic or too open ended. So I really encourage you to find a system that's kind of built for that. And for all the ones that I mentioned, there's still other ones out there. There's a lot of different systems out there that lend themselves to multi-genre style of campaigns and storytelling. So don't be afraid to hop online. Put in RPG system, mashup, horror, and sci-fi. And you'll find some different examples out there. Maybe even find samples on YouTube. You'll likely even find examples of play. Now, what does this look like in a campaign? What does this look like when you mix and mash genres? I mean, we can kind of talk about how it is, but what does it really do? As I mentioned in like a game like Feng Shui, it's very much an action movie role playing game. So think of the crazy action movies from the '80s, like Time Cop, and mixing up cop genre type movies with time traveling sci-fi. Terminator is a great example. You have modern day things with these metal robots coming along here, and you're trying to survive against a very powerful foe from the future. Um, the idea of a perfect Feng Shui style adventure is Big Trouble in Little China. You've got sorcerers fighting against each other and these weird supernatural monsters, and a guy that's good at kung fu, and a guy who drives a truck who's got great reflexes. Not the typical cast of an action movie, but it lends itself to a really fun adventure that really has a lower power level, but a lot of potential for role play and a potential for some very interesting scenes and interesting encounters that go against your normal typical. I think of Big Trouble in Little China there, just some of the crazy fights with the neon temple and uh, people with kung fu moves flying around and all kinds of things. It's a crazy mix up of things there, and Feng Shui does that really, really well. But if you're looking for more of a again, looking for the idea of you are running around with guns, sneaking through the streets there, maybe encountering some supernatural spirits. Someone in your party can maybe banish them or summon up ones of their own to fight against them. You're looking at Shadowrun. You've got this mission oriented game where you're all playing Shadowrunners with some power level or other, trying to steal things from a corporation or trying to work out some kind of crazy heist of some kind using the skills that you have, which include tech skills, computer hacking, and magic, all on the same team of people to deal with the threats or setting the setup that you're looking at in terms of what these corporations will set up there. And so it's a very fun sort of heist driven style game that incorporates both magic and technology. So, whereas, as I mentioned, things like Deadlands, you might have a gunslinger character alongside of an exorcist type priest person, along with a snake oil salesman, traveling guy, huckster, card wielding guy that can throw magic around by pulling cards from a deck and making things happen. Fighting against some crazy zombie infested zombies attacking a western town somewhere, or a pack of wild devil dogs trying to mess with a farmstead or something else, and you're trying to fight them off and save the farmer. Um, that's the kind. Just anything goes in these fun mashup type scenarios here. So, do we have anybody out there? Nobody's out there right now. So, we'll kind of keep going here. This may be a little bit shorter episode today because no one's in the chat right now. But um, uh, if you're watching in the future here, feel free to throw in the comments some of the cool mix and mash mashups that you've been in, that you've had some fun with there, and any suggestions you have for other systems that might be perfect for doing mashup, or that are mashups themselves. Um, So to continue on here, let's look at ways of bringing in other genres into existing games. And I will say that almost any role-playing game, um, Wild West meets Dinos. Uh, I've not seen that system exactly, but it would be a fun one there. There is a Cowboys and Dinosaurs. It's a comic book that's out there, so I'm sure that there is definitely some RPG adaptation that involved dinosaurs and cowboys, or cowboy dino riding cowboy dino riding cowboys. Um, I'm sure it's out there. It'd be a lot of fun. That'd be a crazy type scenario to be in. But when it comes to mashups, one of the easiest things to mash up into any genre is horror. As long as you have something creepy, something supernatural, something overpowered and hard to pin down. Um, Obviously, we have countless examples of this in modern movies, where you have the slasher flicks of some supernatural axe wielding maniac hunting down teenagers at a summer camp. Um, that right there makes for a crazy one shot adventure. I've seen that done before in many different systems, where a whole bunch of lower powered average people are having to survive against a supernatural killer on the loose. It makes for a very fun game, or even in a scenario where you have a party there who gets thrown um, into that kind of setting there. Imagine a shadow run where the building goes on lockdown and some crazy uh, cyber zombie mass like killer gets unleashed in the building with the party. They got to survive it. You're talking about a new horror element added in to an existing game. In D&D or other fantasy genres, there's already lots of undead and ghosts and supernatural things that can totally take a normal hack and slash campaign and turn it into a horror game where you're having to survive against things that you may not have the tools to take on, especially in lower power levels. A pack of zombies against a first level party in D&D is going to be a challenge. It's going to require some definite uh, creativeness to survive as that kind of a setting. As you get higher levels, things like ghosts and wraiths come along, liches and mummies and things like that come along. More and more powerful undead are out there. And while it turns into less of a horror game, it works in more of a horror action game where you're fighting these supernatural creatures, but you have the tools to do it. So that power level can really shift how much of a horror element it has. And so, or if there's a way to balance the scales, where suddenly now, yeah, the party's woken up from from a resting point at campsite, and before they can actually equip all their gear or grab it, or their gear has been taken away by them, now they're having to fight off something without all their tools in place. Again, a very much of a horror element now, where you balance the scales by shifting what's available to the group or what setting they're in. Um, so and again, sci-fi, of course, bringing in powerful alien kind of horror type thing, or even it could be if you ever watched movies like Event Horizon or Hellraiser. These are supernatural, horrific things happening to people in ways that you don't expect. So, so yeah, mashing up horror is not difficult to do. Mashing up other genres can be a little bit trickier sometimes. Mashing up sci-fi and fantasy, you do run into that problem of a plasma rifle against someone with a crossbow. Plasma rifle wins. How do you balance that? How do you make that available? Um, Lightsaber versus guy with a combat knife. Lightsaber's going to win. So the idea of how do you balance equipment and what they can do, but they don't really have an easy way to even the scales, and that can be part of the adventure of how do you deal with that? How do you avoid it? How do you overcome that? So, but it lends itself to that. Then once the party has those powerful items, how do you challenge them, or with other people who have similar items or things that are more powerful? And so, it's ramping up your encounters until they have equivalent sort of power levels, and it can be tricky in a sci-fi fantasy setting. But it is possible. It just takes a little bit more work. It's very similar though just as a straight up D&D, challenging a high level party with powerful magics and all their class abilities and everything else like that. It all comes down to figuring out what's going to be a challenging, fun encounter for this party, for group of this group of badasses. Let's just say. So yeah, Sora mentioning their running their Heroes of the Grim game, a very cool genre mashup game there, fantasy but more fairy tale fantasy, along with sort of it's set in D&D, so a D&D but with the enemies all being very much fairy tale type things. Not in the Feywild sense, but those literal actual Grimm's fairy tales. Very cool, sort of a setting mashup rather than a genre mashup exactly. But yeah, yeah, having to deal with a bad guy when they don't all they have is their starting equipment, or they not even have their starting equipment yet. Um, but yeah, any way you can balance the scales, especially for a horror setting, there you can really uh, challenge someone by not having their normal things. And in fantasy, it's figuring out what the equivalents are between sci-fi and fantasy. Obviously, running around with these big powerful guns is equivalent to powerful magic items that do something similar. Wand of fireballs versus a guy with a plasma rifle. um, Similar dice being tossed around here, similar effect, but you have different sort of like a different spin on that. Now, how to do this? Taking that and adding it to an existing game can be a challenge. I will say one setting that sort of did that would have been Spelljammer. The idea of taking D&D and suddenly you're on a magical ship in astral space, and it turns into more of almost like a spaceship style game there, reskinned to be more still very fantasy based there, but the style of the game has suddenly changed from a I'm running around on horseback or flying around on this, but now I'm flying on a ship in astral space with all kinds of alien creatures out there. having to learn what's going on out there. So Spelljammer is it's still very fantasy, but it has some sci-fi elements within it. But one thing that D&D did, um, yes, Dragonstar, exactly. I mentioned that one earlier, so good to see there. I see that's yeah. So, but yeah, the um, in D&D they had a module. Hold back there, Expedition to the Barrier Peaks. And it was all couched in fantasy and everything else, and it was hard to tell what was going on there. But what you realized stepping back from the game, you were finding a crashed spaceship with some alien corpses on it who had things like blaster weapons. And so suddenly you now have like a ray gun in D&D that fires out beams of fiery energy that have limited power cells and how much they can do, but they can skin it as something it really is a sci-fi element that's being found by characters who have no clue this is anything. They don't know what a spaceship is. They don't know what the aliens are. They don't know what ray guns are. But they now are finding these things to see, um, you now incorporated a whole new sci-fi element into a pure fantasy world. Um, if this is true, I think it is right here. Finding sci-fi elements in a fantasy world where you find out that you're all clones and came from like high-tech tanks um, run by a strange witch who was more of a scientist experimenting on cloning techniques. I mean, again, we had no clue that was a thing until all of a sudden it was. And so, again, a very interesting way to mash sci-fi into a fantasy game in a way that you didn't really expect or didn't really that the players never saw coming. The fun way to mash it up in there rather than saying, "Hey, this is a science fiction fantasy world." No, it's a fantasy world, and now here's a new sci-fi element that you never would have expected. A very fun way to incorporate that. Um, so, um, yeah. So there's other. Oh, yes. We weren't technically clones. We were her kids, but we were grown in vat, though. That's the thing, though. That's what I meant there, like the clone, like tank. Um, but yeah, finding this weird lab with these glass tanks with weird fluid in them, and that's where we came from. Okay. Um, but again, a really fun way of taking a totally pure fantasy world there and introducing a sci-fi element that players aren't going to see coming. It's a great way to mash up the genres without making it part of the core. This is how it works. Now, another a similar vein to that is taking. So right now, in Avarice, there are airships and there are magical technology that has a very sci-fi, steampunk, spellpunk, whatever you want to call it, um, uh, aspect to it. But it really is still pure sci-fi. Then you go to a system which would have been Iron Kingdoms, which is set in the War Machine universe, more of a miniatures warfare game. But they released a D&D setting for Iron Kingdoms here, where they literally had steampunk robots operated by steam and magically powered. They were controlled by people that could interface with them magically. And so you had these literal, like, walking steampunk robots, similar to golems in the pure D&D setting. Uh, but they would then duke it out and fight for you and anything else and having that. In a way, it's a way that very similar to now in D&D, you have the Artificer and the Steel Defender. It's that sort of same aesthetic, at least. So you can incorporate that totally steampunky sci-fi element into a fantasy based game, or other way around. I've never seen a role playing game set up for this yet, but in terms of a genre that's out there, there's the Warlock in Spite of Himself series by Christopher Stasha, where literally a person in a spaceship crash lands on a totally fantasy based world. Um, and people on that world have magic. I mean, they don't really have full on magic, but they have tales of magic, and there are people that can do certain things that seem like magic. But this guy had a blaster rifle, and he had a robot companion, and so suddenly there was this. They started calling him a wizard and a warlock because he had magical things that no one had seen before. But it was very much a fantasy world that now had a sci-fi element added to it. So campaigns or settings that have those um, those elements added to them, that mashup of genres, can be a lot of fun, and they don't require a tremendous amount of work. Just taking and reskinning something, instead of you having a staff of thunder and lightning, you now have a a uh, a a a, a, um, a blaster rod that can generate electricity, some sort of lightning based generator that now to anyone else out there would look like a magical item, but it's technologically based. And so you can kind of do that where by reskinning certain magic items, you've added a whole new sci-fi element into a game without breaking the system, without changing the core of what the game is. It's just a reskinning of something that already is to add a sci-fi feel. So again, have fun with taking and subverting the typical things you see and adding a twist to it that adds in elements from other genres or other settings. Um, so, those of you, a couple of you out there, other sort of genres or campaign styles, uh, would you and maybe have you ever experienced or ever been a part of? If there's anyone out there that has that, I think um, I know for a fact that AW there uh, had a campaign recently where you were all sort of Wild West, but it was a fantasy game. So imagine warlock gunslingers, and instead of firing out Eldritch Blast, you're firing out blasts from like your pistols. Um, Same core mechanics, same everything else, but you've skinned it now in a way that's more of a wild old west fantasy mashup. Again, instead of having the weird west, a western where you've added supernatural elements to it, taking a fantasy game and adding a more western feel to it. Definitely a fun way to do it there without changing the mechanics of the game, without changing anything about breaking the mechanics of the game. Um, Again, another way to do that. So to kind of bring it all together here, um, how much you mash, how much you mash up. Um, yes, a bard ranger gunslinger bounty hunter. Exactly. So imagine a bard type character, ranger abilities, and you have uh, gunslinging. Uh, Definitely a lot of fun. You can add that kind of element to it there. The DM that takes LARPing games and brings them into D&D. Exactly. The idea of taking any sort of scenario, adventure, setting, concepts of a story and bring it into a new system, sometimes it can be a little bit tricky. It can be a little tricky to kind of make them go through seamlessly. Sometimes it doesn't quite work, and you have to kind of work at building the balance for it. But the possibilities are there. Don't be afraid of of taking a campaign in a new direction. There's no reason you have to go in a traditional setting, or just a straight up normal fantasy setting. You can always mix and match however you want. Which adds to just a complete wide open set of adventures you can play in. Just kind of the beauty of this whole thing. Um, so in designing what you're doing there, starting with a system that you're comfortable with, familiar with, that you can kind of build your baseline and figure out what you're going to do there. Either an existing system or a generic system can open up all kinds of doors for mixing and matching all kinds of things, and most of them have ways of balancing. Some don't do it very well, but they do have ways of balancing power levels, um, or taking existing systems and adding in set elements, set pieces, setting in things to kind of give it a feel from a different genre can also work. So either way you go, don't be afraid to have fun with those crazy setups there. Um, is there any other fun ones? Someday, playing as bad guys, not an evil campaign. Yeah, playing as someone who's thieves. Like you're all in it. You're all selfish guys, murder hobos, and or just scoundrels. That can be a lot of fun too. And it's sort of like taking almost that anti-hero campaign. Not so much evil, but just not the good guys or selfish. Think Firefly. Think Ocean's 11. Those were not good people, but they had some great skills that allowed them to do some very fun things. Some may be more aligned to a one shot, but some can be a long running campaign, and that can be a lot of fun. So yeah, and yeah, we talking about like mashing up genres, even subgenres. The idea of like having a heist movie can be set in any setting, a heist type adventure. So, um, and what tools you bring to that setup there depend on the setting you're in. Okay, so um, well, let's go ahead and kind of start wrapping things up there. Um, the last thing I'll mention here is you have the freedom in all these systems to do what you want. You're not locked into one thing there. Yes, the guys in Firefly were good guys. They were great guys. Good to see you, Didi. Um, uh, exactly, but they were not heroes. Oh, of course they were big damn heroes. Of course they were. But the idea of in the eyes of someone else, they were sort of outlaws. And so that's the cool thing of being that genre of like the good guys are the bad guys, but the good guys are yeah. It makes for a very fun dynamic that can really take a whole new type of game there. Um, uh, so again, you have the freedom, use it, and you know what? Talk to your players. They may have ideas that they want to bring in. Oh, fellow, I we sleep is important. I know this. So, but good to see you. Good to have you here anyway, Didi. Bernie. So, um, any other ideas or any other suggestions there? Throw them out in the chat if you're there. But one last, I'll let you in on a preview of things to come. Somewhere, I'm not right away, but somewhere down the road here, I am going to run a lower power magic, where I'm mashing up Fallout and D&D. Now, the system I'm going to use is not going to be D&D, but it's a fantasy-based Fallout game where you're survival in a place where there's all sorts of bad things happening, terrible creatures to deal with, spirits, monsters, that kind of stuff here, but you don't have the resources, or you have to try to collect the resources to deal with that. And so, for that, I'm going to be using the Age system, which there's Dragon Age role playing game, but the AGE system, they it is set up for uh, different settings. There, it has sort of built-in component to that. When doing the fantasy age, but the enemies you fight are going to be different kinds of enemies. Not just a straight up. It has a feel of like demonic possessed creatures. Lots of elementals, lots of things that are from other planar areas as the world has been torn apart by magic. And this is set in the early days of Avarice in my world, shortly after the cataclysm. Things are still chaotic and messed up, and you have refugees in a new land trying to survive and set up a way to um, a way to uh, secure villages or holdings or resources and everything else. And the idea of being a group of adventurers out there trying to find something to keep them to stay alive in a chaotic, messed up world. But I originally had planned, and this kind of little behind the scenes, under the hood kind of thing like that. Originally had planned taking D&D, but trying to scale down the power level. And I quickly realized that trying to scale down the power level of a game that's set to go much higher level, you just have to put too many constraints on it. You have to prevent certain classes from being used, and certain having a level cap, and having certain items not be available, or certain races not being available. And rather than going through all that craziness of I need to take what's here and scale it all back and try to compress it into what's going to work for the setting that I'm in, going to a different system is a lot easier because there's other systems that lend themselves to that level, that power level, or have a different way of doing things that make it easier to do that, where you don't have to have that crazy top end power level that D&D has. No one's casting Wish, no one's casting Teleport, no one's casting Power Word Kill. Yes, I know. Sorry about that. Um, but the idea that you have that ultra powerful magic, I know, I know, Sora. Um, Exactly. Not everything has to be D&D. There are lots of fantasy systems out there. There's lots of systems out there to use there. So don't be afraid. If the genre you want to make, the game you want to make doesn't work in one system, find a different system. There's so many out there that lend themselves to what you want to do, that maybe there's a system out there that perfectly does what you want it to do, or you use one of the more generic ones that you can hit custom make to whatever you want to do. So don't be afraid in your mashups, in mashing up your genres, to mix up the systems and go to something different. Um, I know D&D is a comfort for a lot of people. It's what people know. I mean, obviously, it's I have the most of, but other things out there can really help to get the feel for you want, to get the power level you want, to get the style of game you want to play. Don't be afraid to try something different. So, um, uh, uh, so with that in mind, um, I want to give you the kind of that closing thought of have fun with your mashups, have fun with totally different setups, and let your players add to it. Your players are going to have a lot of feedback for you, a lot of things. What they're gonna show you what they like. They're going to basically be able to fit in there and help you build out what you want to do if you give them a chance. So, um, again, the key to making a good mashup is going to be communication, finding the right system, and making sure that everyone's having fun. So, hope you're out there having fun. Uh, I don't have a plan for my show in 2 weeks yet. Um, So, if, as always, if you happen to have ideas, go ahead and throw them my way. Go ahead and uh, or either here in comments in the video here. Obviously, contact me on Tumble Tankard there. Sitting there, there's a suggestion box there for things like that, or drop it into some of the chats there, or you can send it to me in a private message. But any questions you have, any thoughts you have about other ideas for the show there, feel free to throw them my way. We'll build something new around that, and try something different. So, anyway, thanks for being here. Those of you out there, those of you watching in the future, hope you got something good from this, and hope that we can kind of keep things rolling here and bring some new information out to you again here soon. So, um, as always, if you're looking for games, Tumble Taker has you covered. We've got lots of games running. There's a game running right now. In fact, I want to say it's a finish. Which one is it right now? I want to say it is Gray Marsh Town. It's a D&D adventure going right now there with a number of players in it. So you've got an Arkham horror game or a Cthulhu game looking for a couple of players. We've got some Traveler games. We've got some D&D games of all different kinds. We have even a Shadowrun game. and an Animon game, which is very much a Pokemon style sort of Kickstarter game there. So hope you can come out there, join in, check it out. If you have ideas you want to run free games for yourself, we can help set you up too. So thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. Thank you for being out there as always. And we'll see you again next time. Have fun, everybody. Bye.